Chapter 12. As soon as he walked through the door, Sevgi knew she was in trouble. It was there in the looseness as he moved, in the balance of stance as he paused behind the chair, in the way he hooked it out and sat down. It smoked off the body beneath the shapeless blue prison coveralls like music cutting through radio interference. It looked back at her through his eyes as he settled into the chair, and it soaked out through the powerful quiet he'd carried into the room with him. It wasn't Ethan. Marsalis had skin far darker than Ethan's, and there was no real similarity in the features. Ethan had been stockier too, heavier muscled. Ethan had died younger. It didn't matter. It was there just the same. 13. Mr. Marsalis? He nodded, waited. I'm Sevgi Ertekin, Cullen Security. You've already met my partner, Tom Norton. There are a number of things we need to clarify before— I'll do it. His voice was deep and modulated. The English accent tripped her. I beg your pardon? Whatever it is you need me to do, I'll do it. At cost. I already told you, partner. I'll take the job in return for unconditional immunity to all charges pending against me, immediate release from Republican custody, and any expenses I'm likely to incur while I'm doing your dirty work. Her eyes narrowed. That's quite an assumption you're making there, Mr. Marsalis. Is it? He raised an eyebrow. I'm not known for my flower arranging, but let's see if I'm assuming wrong, shall we? At a guess, you want someone tracked down, someone like me. That's fine. That's what I do. The only part I'm unclear on is if you want me to bring him in alive or not when I find him. We are not assassins, Mr. Marsalis. Speak for yourself. She felt the old anger flare. You're proud of that, are you? You're upset by it? She looked down at the unfolded data slate and the text printed there. In Peru, you shot an unarmed and injured woman in the back of the head. You executed her. Are you proud of that, too? Long pause. She picked up his stare and held it. For a moment she thought he would get up and walk out. Half of her, she realized, hoped he would. Instead, he switched his gaze abruptly to one of the high-placed windows in the waiting room. A small smile touched his lips. Went away. He cleared his throat. Miss Ertekin, do you know what a hog gun is? I've read about them. In NYPD communiques, urging City Hall to issue tighter gun control guidelines before the new threat hit the streets. Scary enough that the initiatives passed almost without dispute. It's a bioload weapon. It's a little more than that, actually. He opened his right hand loosely, tipped his head to look at it as if he could see the gun weighed there in the cup of his palm. It's a delivery system for an engineered immune deficiency viral complex called Folwell 7. There are other loads, but they don't get a lot of use. Folwell is virulent and very unpleasant. There is no cure. Have you ever watched someone die from a collapsed immune system, Miss Ertekin? In fact, she had. Nalan, a cousin from Hakkari, a one-time party girl in the frontier bases where Turkey did its proud European duty and buffered the mess farther east. Something she caught from a UN soldier. Nalan's family, who prided themselves on their righteousness, threw her out. Sevgi's father spat and found a way to bring her to New York, where he had clout in one of the new Midtown research clinics. Relations with family in Turkey, already strained, snapped for good. He never spoke to his brother again. Sevgi, only 14 at the time, went with him to meet a sallow, big-eyed girl at the airport, older than her by what seemed like a gulf of years, but reassuringly unversed in urban teen sophistication. She still remembered the look on Nalan's face when they all went into the Skillman Avenue Mosque through the same door. Murat Ertekin did everything he could. He enrolled Nalan in experimental treatment lists at the hospital, fed her vitamin supplements and tracker antivirals at home. He painted the spare room for her, sun-bright and green like the park. He prayed 5 times a day for the first time in years. Finally, he wept. Nalan died anyway. Sevgi blinked away the memory, fever-stained sheets and pleading hollow eyes. You're saying you did this woman a favor? I'm saying I got her quickly and painlessly where she was going anyway. Don't you think that should have been her choice? He shrugged. She made her choice when she tried to jump me. If she doubted what he was at all, she no longer did. It was the same unshakable calm she'd seen in Ethan, and the same psychic bulk. He sat in the chair like something carved out of black stone, watching her. She felt something tiny shift in her chest. She tapped a key on the data slate. A new page slid up on the display. You were recently involved in prison violence, a fight in the F-wing shower block. 4 men hospitalized, 3 of them by you. Pause. Silence. You want to tell me your side of that? He stirred. I would think the details speak for themselves. 3 white men, 1 black man. It was an Aryan Command punishment beating. Which prison staff did nothing to prevent? Surveillance in the showers can be compromised by steamy conditions. Quote, unquote. His lip curled fractionally. Or soap jammed over lenses. Response time can be delayed by extraneous factors. Quote, unquote. So you felt moved to intervene. She groped around for motivations that would have fitted Ethan. This Reginald Barnes, he was a friend of yours? No. He was a piece of shit wirehead snitch. He had it coming. But I didn't know that at the time. Was he genetically modified? Marsalis smirked. Not unless there's some project somewhere I haven't heard of for turning out brainless, addictive personality fuck-ups. You felt solidarity because of his colour, then? The smirk wiped away. It became a frown. I felt I didn't want to see him arse-fucked with a power drill. I think that's probably a colour-neutral preference, don't you? Sevgi held on to her temper. This wasn't going well. She was gritty with the sin come-down. No synaptic modifiers permitted in Jesus land. They'd taken them off her at the airport, and still fuming from the argument she'd lost with Norton in New York. I'm serious, Sev. The policy board's all over this thing now. We've got Ortiz and Roth coming down to Section 2 3 times a week. In the flesh? What an honour. They're looking for progress reports, Sev, which means reports of progress, and right now we don't have any. If we don't do something that looks like fresh action, Nicholson is going to land on us with both feet. Now, I'll survive that. Will you? She knew she wouldn't. October. Back in New York, the trees in Central Park were stained rust and yellow. Under her window as she got ready for work each day, the market traders went wrapped against the early morning chill. The summer had turned, tilted about like a jetliner in the clear blue sky above the city, sunlight sliding cold and glinting off its wings. The warmth wasn't gone yet, but it was fading fast. South Florida felt like clinging. How much has Norton told you? Not much. That you have a problem Ungla won't help you with. He didn't say why, but I'm guessing it's Munich-related. A sudden, unexpected grin that dropped about a decade off his seamed features. You guys really should have signed up to the Accords like everybody else. Colin approved the draft in principle, said Sevgi, feeling unreasonably defensive. Yeah, all about that principle, wasn't it? Principally, you don't tell us what to do, you globalist bureaucrat scum. Since he wasn't far wrong, she didn't argue the point. Is that going to be a problem? No, I'm freelance. My loyalties are strictly for sale. Like I already said, just tell me what you want me to do. She hesitated a moment. The data slate had an integral resonance scrambler built to Colin's specs, which made it tighter than anything any lawyer had ever carried into an interview room at South Florida State, and Marsalis was pretty clearly desperate for an out. Still, the habit of the past 4 months was ingrained. We have, she said finally, a Renegade 13 on our hands. He's been loose since June. Killing. He grunted. No visible surprise. Where'd he get out of? Cimarron? Tanana? No. He got out of Mars. This time she had him. He sat up. This is a completely confidential matter, Mr. Marsalis. You need to understand that before we start. The murders are widely distributed and varied in technique. No official connection has been made among them, and we want it to stay that way. Yeah, I bet you do. How'd he get past the nano-rack security? He didn't. He shorted out the docking run and crashed the vessel into the Pacific. By the time we got there, he was gone. Marsalis pursed his lips in a soundless whistle. Now there's an idea. She let the rest out. Anything to take the smug, competent control off his face. Before that, he had systematically mutilated the other 11 cryo-capped crew members in order to feed himself. He amputated their limbs and kept them alive in suspension, then, finally, began to kill them and strip the rest of their bodies for meat. A nod. How long was transit? 33 weeks. You don't seem surprised by any of this. That's because I'm not. You're stuck out there, you've got to eat something. Did you ever think that? Something like a shadow passed across his eyes. His voice came out just short of even. Is that how you found me? Cross-reference? Something like that. She chose not to mention Norton's sudden enthusiasm for the new tactic. Our profiling engine cited you as the only other 13 known to have experienced similar circumstances. Marsalis offered her a thin smile. I never ate anybody. No. But did you think about it? He went silent for a while. She was on the point of asking her question again when he got up from the seat and went to stand by the high window. He stared out at the sky. It crossed my mind a few times, he said quietly. I knew the recovery ship was coming, but I had the best part of 2 months to worry about it. You can't help running the scenarios in your mind. What if they don't make it? What if something crazy happens? What if... He stopped. His gaze unhooked from the cloud cover and came back to the room, back to her face. Was he out there the whole 33 weeks? Most of it. From what we can tell, his cryocap spat him out about 2 weeks into the trajectory. And Mars Control didn't fetch him back? Mars Control didn't know about it. Sevgi gestured. The engine went down. Looks like it was tricked out. The ship fell back on automated systems. Silent running. He woke up right after. That's a nice little cluster of coincidence, isn't it? But not very convenient from a culinary point of view. No. We're assuming the cryocap timing was an error. Whoever spiked the engine probably planned to have the system bring him up a couple of weeks out from Earth. Something in the intrusion program flipped when it should have flopped, and you wake up 2 weeks out from Mars instead. Our friend arrives starved and pissed off, and probably not very sane. Do you know who he is? Sevgi nodded. She hit the keypad again and pushed the data slate around so they could both see the screen and the face it held. Marsalis left the window and propped himself in casual angles on the edge of the table. Light gleamed off the side of his skull. Alan Merrin. We recovered trace genetic material from Hawkins' Pride, the vessel he crashed, and ran it through Collins' 13 database. This is what they came up with. It was almost imperceptible, the way he grew focused, the way the casual poise tautened into something else. She watched his eyes sweep the text alongside the pale head and shoulders photo. She could have recited it to him from memory. Merrin, Alan, SIN 48523DX3814. Delivered, C/S, April 26, 2064. Taos, New Mexico, Project Lawman. Neutral host, Bilikisu Sankari. Source, genetic material, Isaac Hobsha. Isabella Gayoso. SINs appended. All genetic code variants, property of L&S Hall, Inc. Patents asserted, L&S Hall and U.S. Army Partnership 2029. Initial conditioning and training, Taos, New Mexico. Specialist skills development, Fort Benning, Georgia. Covert ops, counterinsurgency. Deployed, Indonesia 2083. Arabian Peninsula 2084-5. Tajikistan 2085-7 and 2089. Argentina. Bolivia 2088. Rim Authority, Urban Pacification Program, 2090-91. Retired 2092, under 2nd UNGLA Convention Accords, Jacobson Protocol. Accepted Mars Resettlement, 2094. Colin citizenship record appended. Very Christ-like. She blinked. I'm sorry? The face. He tapped the screen with a fingernail. The LCLS glow rippled around the touch. Merrin stared up under the tiny distortions. Very Faith satellite channel. Looks like that Man-Taking Names anime they did for the Cash Memorial. The smile slipped out before she could stop it. His mouth quirked a response. He moved the chair a little, sat down again. "Saw that, did you? We get the reruns in here all the time. Faith-based rehab, you know." "Quit grinning at him like a fucking news face, Sev. Get a grip." "You don't recognize him, then?" A curious, tilted look. "Why would I? You were in Iran." "Wasn't everybody?" When she just waited, he sighed. "Yeah, we heard about the lawmen. Saw them at a distance a few times in Iran, down around Alvaz. But from what you've got there, it doesn't look like this Mary never got up that far north." "He could have." Sevgi nodded toward the screen. "I'll be honest with you. This is a pretty loose summary. Once you get into the mission records, it's a whole lot less defined. Covert deployments, so-called lost documentation, rumor and hearsay, subject is understood to have, that sort of shit. Executive denial and cover-ups around practically every corner. Plus, you've got a whole fucking hero mythology going on around this guy. I've seen data that puts Merrin in combat zones hundreds of kilometers apart on the same day. Eyewitness accounts that say he took wounds we can't find any medical records to confirm. Some of them wounds he couldn't possibly have survived if the stories are true. Even that South American deployment has too much overlap to be wholly accurate. He was in Tajikistan. No, he wasn't. He was still in Bolivia. He was solo deployed. No, he was leading a lawman platoon in Kuwait City." Her disgust bubbled over. "I'm telling you, the guy's a fucking ghost." He smiled. A little sadly, she thought. "We all were back then," he said. "Ghosts, I mean. We had our own British version of Project Lawman. Minus the delusional name, of course. We called it Osprey. The French preferred Department 8. But none of us ever officially existed. What you've got to remember, Miss Ertekin, is that back in the 80s the whole 13 thing was fresh out of the can. Everyone knew the technology was out there, and everybody was busy denying they'd ever have anything to do with it. UNGLA didn't even exist back then, not as an agency in its own right. It was still part of the Human Rights Commission, and no one was very keen on letting anybody else get a close look at their new genetic warriors. The whole Middle East was a testing ground for all sorts of cutting-edge nastiness, and all of it was operating on full deniability. You know how that shit works, right?" She blinked. "What shit?" "Deniability. You work for Colin, right?" "I've been with Colin 2.5 years," she said stiffly. "Before that I was a New York police detective." He grinned again, a little more genuine humor in it this time. "Getting the hang of it, though, aren't you? This is a completely confidential matter. We want it to stay that way. That's very Colin." "It's not a question of that." She tried without much success to get the stiffness out of her voice. "We don't want a panic on our hands." "How many has he killed so far? Here on the ground, I mean." "We think it's in the region of 20. Some of those are unconfirmed, but the circumstantial evidence points to a connection. In 17 cases we've recovered genetic trace material that clinches it." Marsalis grimaced. "Busy little fucker. Is this all in the Rim states?" "No. The initial deaths were in the San Francisco Bay Area, but later they spread over the whole of continental North America." "So he's mobile?" "Yes. Mobile, and apparently a very competent systems intrusion specialist. He murdered 2 men at the same location in the Bay Area on the night of June 13th, and a man in southeastern Texas less than a week later. There's no trace anywhere in the flight records for that period, and nothing from Rim Border Control either. We had an engine run face recognition checks on every cross-border flight and surface exit into the Republic for that week and got nothing." "He could have had his face changed." "In less than a week? With matching documentation? Rim State's fence line is the toughest frontier anywhere in the world. Anyway, the same engine we used for the face recog had instructions to flag anyone with bandaging or other traces of recent surgical procedure to the face. All we got was a bunch of rich brats coming home from West Coast cosmetic therapy and a couple of over-the-hill erotica stars." She saw him hold back all but the corner of a grin. It was irritatingly infectious. She concentrated on the data slate. "The only options we are seriously entertaining are that either he was able to contact professional frontier busters within days of coming ashore, or he left the Rim for some other intermediate destination before flying back into the Republic. It would be a tight time frame that way, but still doable. Of course, once it goes global like that, there's no way to run a comprehensive face recog. Too many places that refuse to let the N-Jins into their data systems. I take it these are both confirmed kills? Bay Area, and then Texas? Yes. Genetic trace material recovered at both locations. His gaze went back to the data slate display. What do Fort Benning have to say about it? That Merrin was never provided with substantial data systems training. He could run a battlefield deck, anybody in covert ops could, but that's it. We're assuming he upskilled on Mars. Yeah. Or someone's doing it for him. There is that. He looked at her. If he had systems help getting aboard Hawkins' Pride and he's still getting it now, then this is bigger than just some 13 bailing out of Mars because he doesn't like all the red rocks. Yes. And you're out of leads. It wasn't a question. She sat back and spread her hands. Without access to the Ungla databases, we're in a hole. We've done everything we know how to do, and it isn't enough. The deaths keep coming. They're steady but unpredictable. There's no crescendo effect. No, there wouldn't be. But he's not stopping. He's not making any mistakes big enough to nail him or give us a working angle. Our inquiries on Mars have hit a wall. He obviously covered his tracks there, or, as you say, someone did it for him. And down here? She nodded. Down here, as you've also so eloquently pointed out, we are not on hugely cooperative terms with Ungla, or the UN in general. Well, I guess you can hardly blame them for that. He widened his eyes at her, grinned. It's not like you've been overly cooperative yourselves for the last decade. Look, Munich was not... The grin faded to a grimace. I wasn't really talking about the Accords. I was thinking more of the reception we get in the prep camps every time we have to operate in them. You know we're about as welcome down there as evolutionary science in Texas. She felt herself flush a little. Individual corporate partners in the colony effort do not necessarily... Yeah, skip it. A frown. Still, Ungla have a mandate requirement in circumstances like this. You report a loose 13. They pretty much have to show up. We don't really want them to show up, Mr. Marsalis. Ah. We need access to their data stacks, or failing that, someone like you to talk to our profiling engines. But that's all. In the end, this is a call-in matter, and we'll clean our own house. Listen to you, Sevgi. Cop to corporate mouthpiece in one easy, well-paid move. Marsalis watched her for a couple of moments. He shifted slightly in the chair, seemed to be considering something. Are you running this gig out of New York? Yes. We've got borrowed space at Rimsec's Alcatraz complex, liaison with their detectives, but since this thing went continental, we're back in the New York offices. Why? A shrug. No reason. When I get on the suborb, I like to know where I'm going to be when I get off again. Right. She glanced at her watch. Well, if we're going to make that suborb, we should probably get moving. I imagine my colleague will have finished with the warden by now. There'll be some paperwork. Yes. He hesitated a moment. Listen, there are a couple of people in here I'd like to say goodbye to before we go. People I owe. Can we do that? Sure. Sevgi shrugged carelessly. She was already folding up the data slate. No problem. It's a call-in perk. We can do pretty much anything we want. The Guatemalan was still in his cell, flat on his back in his bunk and blissed out by the look of him on some of his newly acquired endorphin. A half-smoked new Cuban smouldered between the knuckles of his left hand, and his eyes were lidded, almost shut. He looked up, dreamily surprised, when Carl strummed the bars of the half-open door. "Hey, Eurotrash! What you doing here?" "Leaving," said Carl crisply. "But I need a favor." The Guatemalan struggled upright on the bunk. He glanced up to the cell's monitor lens and the cheap interface slinger taped on the wall next to it. No attempt had been made to hide the scrambler, and it had hung there every time Carl had been inside the cell. He didn't like to think what it cost the Guatemalan to have it overlooked on a permanent basis. "Leaving?" A stoned smirk. "Don't see no fucking trowel in your hand?" Carl moved an African-carved wooden stool over to the bunk and seated himself. "Not like that. This is official. Out the front gate. Listen, I need to make a phone call." "Phone call?" Even through the endorphins, the Guatemalan was blearily shocked. "You know what that's going to cost you?" "I can guess. And I don't have it. Look, There are 7 more 20mm caps taped in plastic up in the U-bend of my cell's shitter. All yours. Think of—"
"That ain't gonna cut it, nigger."
"I know. Think of it as a down payment."
"Yeah?"
The stoned look was sliding away from the other man. He put the new Cuban in the corner of his mouth and grinned around it.
"How's that shit work? You walking out of here, how you gonna settle your account? Down payment on what?"
"Come to that." Brow creasing.
"You walking out of here? Why you need my little phone service?"
Carl gestured impatiently. "Because I don't trust the people who are walking me out. Listen, once I'm outside, I'm going to have juice."
"Yeah, sounds like it. Juice with folks that you don't trust."
"I can help you on the outside." Carl leaned in. "This is Colin business. That mean anything to you?" The Guatemalan regarded him owlishly for a moment, then shook his head and got off the bunk. Carl shifted aside to let him past.
"Sound to me, nigger, like you riding. You sure those 7 caps still in that shitter bend, not inside you? Colin getting you out? What the fuck for?"
"They want me to kill someone for them," Carl said evenly. A snort came from behind him. Liquid coursing as the Guatemalan poured himself a glass of juice from the chiller flask he kept on a shelf.
"Sure. In the whole Confederated Republic they can't find one black man to do their killing for them. They got to come flush some high-tone Euro trash out of South Florida State. You riding, nigger?"
"Will you stop fucking calling me that?"
"Oh, yeah."
The Guatemalan drank deep. He put the glass down and made a gusty, satisfied sound.
"I's forgetting. You the only black man in here don't seem to notice what color skin he got."
Carl stared straight ahead at the cell wall. "You know, where I come from, there are a lot of different ways of being black."
"Well, then you one lucky fucking black man."
The Guatemalan moved around to face him. His face was almost kindly, softened with the endorphins and maybe something else.
"But see, blood, 'bout now, where you come from ain't where you at. 'Bout now, you in South Florida State. You in Confederated Republic, nigger. Round here, they only got the one way of being black, and sooner or later that's the black you gonna be. Ain't no diversity of product in the Republic. They just got this one box for us, and sooner or later they're gonna squeeze you in that box right along with the rest of us."
Carl looked at the wall some more. He took the decision. "Now, see, that's where you're wrong."
"I'm wrong?" The other man chuckled. "Look around you, blood. How the fuck am I wrong?"
"You're wrong," Carl told him, "because they already got me in a whole other box. It's a box you won't ever see the inside of, and that's why I'm getting out. That's why they need me. They can't get anyone else like me." The Guatemalan propped himself against the cell wall and gave Carl a quizzical look.
"Yeah? You got moves, trash, I give you that. And what I hear from Louis, you got some fucked up wiring inside you. But that don't make you no stone killer. 2 hours ago you walk out of here with my boy's best shiv work up your sleeve, but what I hear is Dudek still walking around."
"We were interrupted."
"Yeah, by the nice people from Colin."
But there wasn't much mockery in the other man's voice now. He sucked thoughtfully on the cigar.
"Shame about Dudek. That bird shit coulda used some time in the infirmary. You want to tell me what that means? They can't get anyone else like me?"
Carl met his eyes. "I'm a 13. It was like peeling a scab. For the last 4 months he'd kept it hedged behind his teeth, the secret that would kill him. Now he watched the Guatemalan's face and saw the final confirmation for his paranoia, saw the flicker of fear, faint but there, covered for quickly with a nod. "Okay? Yeah." He felt an obscure disappointment. Somehow he'd hoped this man might be proof against the standard prejudice, something about the Guatemalan's patient con-math realism. But now, abruptly, he could feel himself, through the other man's gaze, sliding into caricature, could even feel himself go with it, let go, take on the old skin of impassive power and threat. "So, about this phone call, what's it going to take?" He found Dudek in the F-Wing rec hall, playing speed chess against the machine. 3 or 4 other inmates were gathered around. One tat-stamped and certified AC brother, a couple of late-teen wannabe sycophants, and an older white guy who seemed to be there just for the chess. No one from the chapel confrontation. Dudek would have shrugged loose of them in the wake of the failed gig. Too many undischarged fight chemicals sloshing around, too much blustering talk while they leached back out of the system. Not what you needed at all after a walk away. No one paid any attention to the black man as he came up the hall. Dudek was too deep in the game, and with full audiovid monitoring systems webbed up in the nano-carb vault of the hall, the others were loose and unvigilant. Carl got to within 10 paces of the gathering before anybody turned around. Then one of the wannabes must have caught Black in motion out of the corner of an eye. He pivoted about, stepped forward, secure in the knowledge of how the monitoring system worked, puffed up with association and proximity to Dudek.
"Fuck you won't, nigger."
Carl stepped in and hit him, full force, with one trailing arm in the back of his hand. The impact smashed the boy's mouth and knocked him to the floor. He stayed there, bleeding and staring up at Carl in disbelief. Carl was still moving. He closed with a tat-marked spectator, broke down a fumbled defense, and tipped the man into Dudek, who was still trying to get up from the console. The two men tangled and went down sprawling. The second sycophant hovered, gaped. He wasn't going to do anything. The older guy was already backing off, hands spread low in front of him to denote his detachment. Dudek rolled to his feet with practiced speed. A siren cut loose somewhere. "Got some unfinished business," Carl told him.
"You're fucking cracked, nigger. That's monitored, unprovoked
He let the mesh drive him. Dudek saw it coming, threw together a Thai boxing guard and kicked out. Carl stamped the kick away, feinted the guard, rode the jab-punch response, and then broke Dudek's nose with a close-in palm heel. The Aryan went over again, explosively, backward. The second serious AC member was staggering upright. Carl punched him in the throat to keep him out of the fight. He went down, choking. Dudek had bounced up, hadn't even wiped the blood from his nose. Old hand. His eyes were blank with fury. He came in like a truck, a flurry of blows, all simple, linear shit. Carl beat most of it, winced on a stray punch that scraped his cheekbone, then snagged the other man's right arm at the wrist. He locked up the arm, twisted it, and slammed down with his own forearm. Dudek's elbow broke with a crunch, audible even over the sirens. The Aryans shrieked and went down for the last time. Carl kicked him as hard as he could in the ribs. He felt something give. He kicked again, twice, into the stomach. Dudek threw up on the second impact, softly, like something rupturing. Carl stepped over the Aryan's twitching body to avoid the pool of vomit, stamped in the man's already bloodied face, and then bent over him. He grabbed Dudek's head up by one ear.
"New rules, bird shit," he hissed. "I'm working for the man now. I can do what the fuck I want with you. I could kill you, and it wouldn't make any fucking difference now."
Dudek foamed blood and spit, fragments of a tooth on his smashed lower lip. He was making a low grinding noise somewhere deep in his throat. Carl let go and stood up. For a moment he thought he'd stamp on the crumpled form at his feet again, hard into the base of the spine, to do some damage the infirmary wouldn't easily put right, into the face again, to destroy it utterly. Maybe go back for the ribs until they snapped inward and punctured something. At least, he thought, he might spit on the Aryan. But the rage had drained abruptly away. He couldn't be bothered. The Guatemalan had what he'd asked for. Dudek was out, infirmary bound. Let the remainder of the Aryan's shitty Jesus-land life take him the rest of the way down. Marsalis didn't need to see or inflict any more damage. He already knew, within parameters, how it would play out. They stacked men like Dudek in cheap coffins 5 deep outside the Poor Fund crematoria across the Republic every Sunday. Most of them never made it out of their 20s. At the far end of F-Wing, the gate clanged back and the intervention squad piled through. Body armor, stun-wrap carbines, and yells. Carl sighed, raised his hands to his head, and walked down the siren-screaming nanocarb hall to meet them. "Cordwood Systems. Marsalis. Print me. Voice print confirmed. You are speaking to the duty controller. Please state your preferences. Jade, lettuce, mangosteen, oak. Opening. What are your requirements? I've just been hired out of custody by the Western Nations Colony Initiative. They want me to run a Variant 13 retrieval without Angler jurisdiction. That is contrary to—" "I know. I'll be in New York in a couple of days. Tell the perimeter crews to expect me. I'll be dumping my newfound friends as soon as practically possible." Chapter 13.
Did you have to fucking hospitalize him?
He shrugged. He'd dumped his prison jacket earlier, stripped off shoes and socks too, and the beach sand under his feet was cool and firm. The night air brushed his neck and his bared arms like loose draped silk.
Couldn't see a good reason not to.
No? Ertegun had not taken off her shoes.
Well, it would have meant we got home tonight instead of staying in this dump. Ever think of that?
Her gesture took in the floodlit clutch of low-rise behind them, the comms tower, and behind it, like some Godzilla parent, the endless upward loom of the Perez nanorack. The rack's structure stood mostly in darkness, but red navigation lights blinked in dizzying stacked synchrony, dragging vision upward until the lights disappeared into the cloud cover. "It's your dump," he said.
"It's leased."
"That must be heartbreaking for you. Colin dependent on local state power. I'm surprised you don't just topple the government. You know, like you did in Bolivia back in the 90s. She shot him a look he was beginning to recognize. Halfway to anger, locked down by something else. In another 13 he'd have read it as social aptitude training. Here he wasn't sure what it might mean. Only one thing was clear. Something was scratching at the edges of Sevgi Ertegun, and had been since he met her.
"Marsalis, it's late," she told him. "I'm not going to get in a fight with you about something Colin may or may not have done 10 years before I joined them. The reason we're in this dump is because you let your much-vaunted 13 tendencies get out of hand, and it cost us another 6 fucking hours of phone calls and negotiation, so don't push your luck. I'm close enough to sending you back as it is."
He grinned. "Now you're lying."
"Think so? The warden wanted to refer it all the way back up to Tallahassee and a convened Violent Crimes Committee assessment. He'd just love to have you locked down while that grinds through the legislature."
"I'd have thought he'd be glad to see the back of me."
"Well, you'd be wrong.
Warden Paris is an ex-Marine." Sevgi shot him another glance.
"Just like Will Brink."
"Will who?"
"Yeah, right. Forget it."
He didn't know how much truth she was telling. Certainly things had been fraught once they saw what he'd done to Dudek. The intervention squad didn't quite stun-wrap him on the spot, but it was a close thing. He spent 3 hours in the faintly ammoniac-perfumed gloom of the riot-holding cells, was hauled out, marched summarily across to admin, and then marched just as rapidly back as, he supposed, competing authorizations whiplashed back and forth. It took another 2 hours to get him out of the hole permanently, by which time it was dark and the admin building was down to a skeleton crew of caretakers and security. Norton and Ertegun came and went, in and out of doors to offices he never got to see inside. They barely glanced his way. Shift change came and went. At one point a CO came and took his picture, took it away without comment. Carl let it all wash over him. When they were all done, he signed the documents they gave him, changed back into his own clothes, and, guessing it would be cold in New York, blagged an inmate jacket from the yawning night clerk. It was a use-faded grey-black, not a bad colour in itself, but one sleeve was flashed with a line of orange chevrons, and across the back was the customary Sigma logo and name in the same glaring colour. As with a lot of old stock, some tagging freak wit had taken a dye squirt to the lettering, dumping in a long, jagged lowercase t after the S. He shrugged and took it anyway. Miami PD had impounded his gear from the hotel when they busted him, and he didn't suppose he'd ever see it again. Angler were apparently still negotiating for the return of the Haag gun and its load. Point of principle, point of pride. No one really believed they'd win. He shouldered his way into the jacket, rolled up the short personal effects strip that went with the clothes he'd been arrested in, and walked out. "Fuck the accessories, Carl. You're halfway home." A grim-faced Norton stayed at his side all the way to the innocuous, hired teardrop in the parking lot, opened the back seat for him and closed it again as soon as he was in. Ertegun came out of the admin building a couple of minutes later, muttered something to her partner, and then got in behind the wheel. When Norton was in beside her, she fired up the engine and steered the car out of the prison gates on manual. Neither of the Colin officers spoke to Carl at all. Warden Paris, if he was still on site, never showed. A couple of 100 meters down the exit highway, Norton was already on the phone, checking the Miami suborb terminal for departures north. Not surprisingly, there was nothing flying this late. "Hotel?" he'd asked Ertekin. She shook her head. "Paris is way too pissed. I don't want to wake up to a VCC warrant tomorrow morning because he called some friend in Tallahassee during the night. We need to get back on our own turf." Norton went back to the phone. A couple of hours later they were rolling through a security gate and into the NanoRack facility environs. Powered fences glinted off across the Florida flatland, watchful men and women in coveralls prowling back and forth in the gloom. The low-light headgear they wore made them look like insect aliens from a low-budget stage show. Carl spotted Colin insignia on an upper arm on the badge of a beret. Safe haven. He could see the tension drain almost visibly out of his two rescuers. Now, out on the beach with sand between his toes and his own clothes on his back for the first time in 4 months, he could feel a similar easing in himself. A sudden self-knowledge slopped in him, the awareness of how clenched he'd become, and the faintly scary slide as he let it go increments at a time. He'd been here before a few times. The bridge of the Felipe Sousa, crackling suddenly with transmission from the incoming rescue boat. Stepping off the elevator platform at the bottom of the Hawking NanoRack and onto ground that sucked at him with a full G. Getting out of the teardrop taxi in Hampstead and looking up at Zuli's new pad, checking the street corner sign, wondering if this could really be it, if maybe he'd gotten her instructions wrong, and then seeing her come to the huge picture window and grin down at him, dimly seen through the tree-shadowed glass. The slip in your guts that tells you it's okay. You can let go now. "Tell me something, Ertekin." The words came out of his mouth like exhaled smoke, pure, unguarded conversation. He didn't much care what she thought or said in reply. Just talking and knowing it wasn't going to get him shanked was the point. "You've worked for Colin a couple of years, right? 2.5. So who's senior? You or Norton?" He got the look again, but muted. Maybe she could hear the lack of cabling in his voice. "It doesn't work like that." "No? So how does it work?" He gestured. "Come on, Ertekin. We're just talking here. It's a beach, for fuck's sake." The twitched corner of a smile, but he got the feeling it wasn't for him. He gestured again. "Come on." "Okay, I'll tell you." She shook her head. 1 a.m. The man wants to talk office politics. Works like this. Norton's an accredited Colin investigator, a troubleshooter. Got a dozen years in. He went straight to them after law enforcement training in some upstate college. It's a good career move. Colin pay way over average, and most of the work isn't what you'd call hazardous. You're looking at anti-corruption task forcing, chasing down local government scams on Colin property, Mars Tech licensing breaches, that sort of thing. Not much serial homicide, then? No. When things get heavy, they mostly hire muscle from private military contractors like Ex-Op or Lambert's. Where it's legally messy, they pull local PD liaison. That was me. I came in on a couple of Mars Tech hijacks where Colin's staff got killed, seconded from NYPD homicide. They liked the work I did for them. Norton was moving up to a senior post. He needed a permanent partner with blood work experience, so... She shrugged. Like that, they offered me the job. The money was a lot. I took it. But Norton still ranks you. Ertekin sighed, looking out to sea. What? 13s. You're all so fucking wired for hierarchy. Who's in charge? Who's at the top? Who do I have to dominate? Every detective I ever shared an office with, She stopped. For a moment he thought Norton was there, coming down the beach toward them from the bunkhouse. The mesh cranked rustily. He flicker-checked the beach, saw nothing, went back to her face and found her still staring out at the ocean. "It's what?" "It doesn't matter," she said evenly. "Yeah, Norton ranks me. Norton knows Colin inside and out, but he's not a cop and I am." "So he defers to you?"
We cooperate."
She left the sea and met his eyes. "Strange concept for someone like you, I know. But Norton's got nothing to prove. And a thick head of hair, right?" The lyric left her looking blank. He guessed she was too young to really remember Angry Young and the Men. Carl owned their last album because, hey, who over the age of 40 didn't? The download went triple platinum as soon as it hit the open stacks. But Ertekin would have been barely out of diapers at the time. He'd only just been old enough himself to take it on board when Angry Young blew his brains out all over the fittings of a Kilburn recording studio. Making a mess. Right. Black comic Sly and London Gutter Cool to the last. He sometimes wondered if Angry Young had known what would happen to sales of Making a Mess when he put the barrel of the frag carbine in his mouth that afternoon, grinned, apparently, at the sound man, and flipped the trigger. Whether he had in fact begun to guess when he'd scrawled out the title track and lyrics a year earlier. What's his hair got to do with it? Well, it's hardly male pattern baldness, is it? Hardly. She got it. Oh, you're fucking kidding me. You cannot be serious. Marsalis, you don't have male pattern baldness. No, but I'm not human. It stopped her like a shot from the Haag gun. Even in the last gasp glow from the arc lamps back up on the asphalt, he saw the way her stare tautened as she looked up at him. Her voice, when it came, was exactly as tight. You quoting somebody there? Well, yeah. He chuckled, mostly because it was so good to be out there on the beach with his hands in his pockets and his feet in the sand. Your guys for a start. She raised an eyebrow. My guys? Yeah, you're Turkish, right? Sevgi? Which pretty much makes you a Muslim, I'd guess. Don't you listen to what your bearded betters tell you about my kind? For your information, she said thinly, the last imam I listened to was a woman. She doesn't have much of a beard. Carl shrugged. Fair enough. I'm just drawing on global media here. Islam, the Vatican, those Jesus Land Baptist guys, they're all singing pretty much the same hymn. You don't know what you're talking about. Oh, excuse fucking me. He caught the flapping edge of his mood and dragged it back into place. You got out of jail today, pal. Tomorrow you get out of the Republic. Day after that you're on a suburb home. Just grin and bear it. He pushed out a laugh. I pretty much do know what I'm talking about, Ertekin. See, I live inside this skin. I was there in '93 when Jacobson came into force. And in case you think this is D-mob self-pity, it isn't. We're not just talking about the 13s here. In Dubai I saw indentured Thai bonobos disemboweled and strung up outside the brothels they worked in when the Shahuda hit town. The ordinary whores they just raped and branded. The Shahuda are not... Yeah. The Shahuda are not representative. Heard it. Just like the Gladius Dei don't speak for all those peace-loving Catholics out there, and all those Jesus Land TV freaks got nothing to do with Christianity either. It's all just a big misunderstanding, right? All this slaughter and blind prejudice. These guys just didn't read promotional literature. You're talking about fanatical minor... Look, Ertekin. He found this time the laugh was genuine. I really don't care. I'm a free man tonight. Got my feet in the sand and everything. You want to do the group solidarity thing, run salvage on your broken-down patriarchal belief system, you go right ahead. I've believed some fucking stupid things in my time. Why should you be any different? I'm not going to discuss my faith with you. Good. Let's not then. They stood in the sand and listened to the quiet. Surf boomed on a reef somewhere offshore. Closer in, the smaller waves broke creamily in the gloom, made a white noise hiss as they sucked back. How come you knew I was Turkish? She asked him finally. He shrugged. Been there a lot. One time I had an interpreter called Sevgi. What were you doing in Turkey? What do you think? The tracts? He nodded somberly. Yeah, standard European response. If it's nasty or inconvenient, park it in eastern Turkey. Too far away to upset anyone who matters, and a long walk west if anybody gets out unauthorized. Which happens enough to keep me going back there a couple of times a year. You from the eastern end? No, I'm from New York. Right, he nodded. Sorry. I meant... He stopped as her gaze shuttled past him and up the beach, turned to follow, though long-honed proximity sense already told him this time Norton was there for real. There on the low crest of the dunes, scuffling down through the sand toward them, and by every physical sign Carl knew how to read, hauling bad news in bulk. Tony Montez, age 44, mother of 2. The images flipped up in sequence on the conference room wall screen as Norton talked. Vaguely handsome Hispanic woman, identity card shot, a strong-boned face fleshing out a little with age, henna red hair cut short and stylish. Flip. Body a graceless tangle in disarrayed skirt and blouse, limbed in crime scene white on a polished wood floor. Shot to death in her home in the Angeline Freeport this evening. Flip. Close-up morgue shot. Face bruised at the mouth, makeup smeared, eyes blown black by the pressure of the head shot that had killed her. The entry wound sat in her forehead like a crater. Flip. Children were out at a swimming class with a father. The house is smart, wired into a Securisoft neighborhood net and upgrade paid for the next 3 years. Either Merrin broke in with some very sophisticated intrusion gear, or Tony let him in. Flip. Body detail. One mottled flank and the sexless sag of a breast. There was a fight. He knocked her around, put her on the floor more than once. A couple of her ribs were broken. There's substantial bruising pretty much everywhere. You saw the face. Blood traces everywhere, too. CSI got it off the couch in the other room, the walls, too, in a couple of places. Flip. Red smears on stucco cream. Most of it's hers. Seems like he really went to town. Did he rape her? Carl asked. Flip. No. No detectable sexual assault. Same as the others, said Sevgi quietly. Baltimore, Topeka, that shithole little town in Oklahoma, Lone Springs. Whenever he's killed a woman, it's been the same thing. Whatever this is about, it isn't sex. Flip. Siloam Springs, Norton supplied. Shithole little town in Arkansas, in fact, Sev. Just over the state line, remember? No, I don't remember. Ertekin seemed to regret the retort almost immediately. She gestured. The edge dropped out of her voice. We wired in, Tom. It's not like there was much chance to get to know the place. Norton shrugged. Time enough to decide it was a shithole, though, right? Oh, shut up. It's all Jesus land, isn't it? Ertekin rubbed at an eye and nodded at the projection wall. Why'd they flag this one up? The sequence of images had frozen on another section of pale cream wall, Rorschach blotched with blood and tissue. A tiny red triangle pulsed on and off in the corner of the screen. Yeah, Angeline PD couldn't work this one out. Norton prodded the data slate on the table. On the screen, a block of forensic data floated down into the picture. When Merrin finally killed this woman, he shot her, standing upright in the next room. High-velocity electromag round. It went right through her head and into the wall beyond. The angle suggests he was standing right in front of her. That's what doesn't fit. Dying on her knees when she's finally got no more fight in her, yeah, that I can see, but standing up and just taking it, after the struggle she put up? It doesn't make a lot of sense. Yes, it does. Carl paused for a moment, testing the intuition, the lines of force it flowed along. He knew the shape of it the way his hand knew the butt of the Haag gun. She gave up before she was done, because he threatened her with something worse. Worse than beating her to death? There was an icy anger in the rims of Norton's eyes as he spoke. Carl couldn't tell if it extended to him as well as Merrin. You want to tell me what that would be exactly? The children, said Ertekin quietly. He nodded. Yeah, probably the husband as well, but it's the children that would have clinched it. Played to her genetic wiring. He told her he'd wait until the children came home. You can't know that, said Norton, still angry. No, of course not. But it's the obvious explanation. He got in through the house defences. Either Montez knew him and let him in, or he gutted the software, in which case he'd been scoping the house well enough to know the systems, so he certainly would have known that there were children, that they'd be back soon. That was his leverage. That was what he used. He saw the way a look went between them. It works, up to a point, Ertekin said, more to herself than anyone else.
But all it does is turn the question around. If he was prepared to use a threat like that, why not use it from scratch? Why bother dancing around the furniture in the first place?
Carl shook his head. I don't know, but to me the shot looks like an execution. The fight must have been something else.
Interrogation? You think this was about extracting a confession?
Carl thought about it for a moment, staring into the border of glare and gloom where the side of the screen edged out on the wall. Recollection coiled loose like snakes. This woman seemed to dislodge memory in him practically every time she opened her fucking mouth. Back in jail. Did you ever think that? It was the passageways of the Felipe Souza and the cold inevitability of his thoughts as he waited out the rescue. Now she had him again. The hot, tiny room in a nameless Tehran back street. Blocks of sunlight etched into the floor, the shadow of a single barred window. Stale sweat and the faint aroma of scorched flesh. Discordant screaming from down the hall. Blood on his fist. I don't think so. There are smarter ways of getting information.
Then what?
Pushed Norton. Just straight sadism? Or is this some kind of Ubermensch thing? Brutalism by genetic right? Carl met the other man's eyes for a moment, just to let him know. Norton held his gaze. Carl shrugged. Maybe it was rage, he said. For whatever reasons, maybe this Merin just lost control. Ertekin frowned.
All right, but then he just what? Just calmed down and executed her?
Maybe. That still doesn't make much sense to me, said Norton. Carl shrugged again, this time dismissive. Why should it? What's that supposed to mean? It means, Norton, that at a basic biochemical level you're not like Merin. None of you are. Down in the limbic system, where it counts, across the amygdala and up into the orbitofrontal cortex, Merin has about 1,000 biochemical processes going on that you don't have. Carl had meant to come across calm and detached. Social aptitude routines had his body language and speech locked away from confrontational. But outside it all, the weariness in his own voice astounded him. He finished abruptly. Of course it doesn't make sense to you. You don't have a map for where this guy is right now. Quiet in the softly lit conference room. He could feel Ertekin's gaze on him like a touch. He looked at his hands. You said he's killed 20 others apart from this one? Norton fielded it. 17 confirmed, genetic trace material recovered at the scene. There are another 4 we're not so sure about. That's not including the people he murdered and ate aboard Horkin's Pride. Yeah. You got their stuff mapped out? Where he's been? He didn't look up, but he felt the glance run between them again. Sure, said Norton. He worked the data slate deck, and the image of Tony Montez's blood went away. In its place, continental North America glowed to life, stitched with highways and slashed red along the excision lines of the rim states and the Union. The map was punched through with 17 black squares and 4 grey, each checked against a thumbnail victim photo. Carl got up and went to the wall for a closer look. The Angeline Freeport marker showed a laughing Tony Montez, hair styled up for some party in an off-the-shoulder gown. He touched it gently, and detailed data scrolled down beneath. Mother, wife, real estate feed host, corpse. He looked at the other images pockmarking the map. They were mostly similar, careless snapshots, lives caught in the living. In a couple of cases the image was an ID holoprint, but mostly it was smiles and squints for the camera, close-cropped to cut family members or friends from the frame. The faces looking down were a mix of races and a range of ages, mid-30s all the way up to one old man in his late 60s. Married, single, with children, without. Work ranging from data systems specialities to manual labor. They had nothing in common but the continent they lived on and the fact they were dead. He moved back to the west coast. Norton did something to the data slate, and a Bay Area blow-up slid out on top of the main map. The Hawkins Pride splashdown was marked in a not-to-scale box just off the coast, 11 faces and names stacked on top of one another beside it. Then 3 more red squares, all clustered around San Francisco and Oakland. Carl stared at the grouping for a moment, aware at some level that something didn't gel. He frowned, touched, and read the scroll-down data. Saw the dates. Yeah, that's right. Ertekin moved up behind him. Abruptly he could smell her. He came back. 2 kills. Same day Hawkins' Pride hits the water. Then he's gone, across the frontier into the Republic. Next stop Van Horn, Texas, June 19th. Eddie Tanaka, shot to death outside a cat house on Interstate 10. And when he's back in the Bay Area again, nearly 4 months later, October 2nd, killing this Jasper Whitlock. What does that suggest to you? He forgot his wallet? There you go. I knew there was some reason we hired you. Carl twisted and gave her a reproachful look. Something happened in the line of her mouth. He breathed in, lightly, trying for her scent again. He's working off partial data. However he came up with this hit list, he didn't have all the names at the start. Why cross into Jesus Land in June when he's got to come all the way back and do this guy, Whitlock, later? And now we've got Montez. She's down in the Angeline Freeport. That's a short run down from the bay and no frontier checks. He's making this up as he goes along. Right. What we figured, too. Ertekin backed off a little, ended up close to where Norton was sitting. If Jasper Whitlock had been another Eddie Tanaka type, you could maybe have sold me on Merrin not finding him first time around, needing to go back. But Whitlock was a medical services broker. All above board, upright citizen, pillar of the community, ran his own business. Not the sort of guy that's too hard to find. Merrin shot him sitting behind the desk in his own office. So it's got to be Merrin didn't know he had to kill this guy back in June. He found out later. Question is, where from? Carl stared at the continental map, the scattered black flags. He crosses the border to Ice Tanaka, goes all the way to Texas. Any sign he was after information there? No. Tanaka was strictly a small-time scumbag. Drugs, illicit abortions, the odd smuggled organ deal. Norton looked up from the data slate, face deadpan. In fact, the Jesus Land version of a medical services broker. Well, Ertekin scowled. We already chased that connection, she told Carl. Tanaka's got no official medical standing, in the Republic or anywhere else. He was a biohazard engineer by trade. Rat catcher, supplied Norton. Unemployed anyway for the last 2 years, living mostly off a string of women out of El Paso and points east. Before that, Houston, similar profile. Best guess is that's how he got into the abortion provision in the first place. There's a lot more money in it than catching rats. Carl nodded slowly. Right, so I'm looking at this map. We've got southeastern Texas, northern Texas, western Oklahoma, then 2 in Colorado, 1 suspected in Iowa, Kansas, 1 suspected, 1 dead cert. Ohio, Michigan, 2 in Illinois. South Carolina suspected. Maryland suspected. Louisiana, Georgia, and northern Florida. Have you got any ties between any of these victims? Anything that gels at all? The look on Ertekin's face was answer enough. She was staring at the map too, and the scattered faces of the dead. He could be getting them out of the phone book, for all we know, said Norton soberly. Chapter 14. The sounds of shouting dragged her awake. For a confused moment she thought it was a theft or some excessive haggling down in the market. Then the rhythmic element in the voices made it through the wrap of sleep, and she remembered where she was. She sat up sharply in the narrow barrack-room bed. The inside of her head felt grimy with the lack of sin. On the other side of the room, dawn was seeping through at the edges of the moth-eaten Varipolara curtain. Pearl-grey light lay across the ceiling and down the far wall in blurred stripes. She looked at her watch and groaned. The chanting outside was too muffled to make sense of, but she didn't need to hear the words. On the table beside the bed, her phone rang. Yeah? Norton's voice filtered into her ear. Hear the fans? I'm awake, aren't I? Good call, Sev. If we'd stayed in town, we'd be fucked. That nasty cop mind of yours saves the day again. So, she flapped back the sheet, swung her legs out of bed to the floor, the skin on her thighs goose-fleshed in the cool air. Paris has friends in Tallahassee after all. Better than that. There was a sour grin in Norton's voice. He went to the media feeds. We're all over Good Morning South. Ah, fuck. Groping around on the floor with her free hand for clothes. You think we can still get out of here okay? Well, not by sub-orb, that's for sure. Whatever was keeping the lid on Marsalis's genetic secrets at South Florida State is long gone now. He's blown. Either Paris talked or somebody leaked higher up. Gotta be Paris. Yeah, well, in any case, now you got Jesus landers 50 deep outside both gates and backing up down the access road for a couple of clicks at least. Real die-for-the-Lord types by the look of it. I just got off the phone to our press liaison in Miami, and she tells me there are Bible thumpers lining up for airtime from here to Alaska. She could hear him grinning again. We're not just trying to evade Republican justice anymore, Sev. We're harboring an abomination before the Lord.
Great, so what do we do? Sevgi stuck an arm into a shirt sleeve. Fly home the old-fashioned way? Colin's got to have a couple of flat-lying Lears down here, right? For short-hop VIPs?
I would think so, yes.
And they're not going to shoot us out of the sky when we hit Republic airspace, are they?
Norton said nothing. Sevgi remembered her profiler cups halfway through seaming her shirt shut. She split the seam back open, peered around on the floor.
Come on, Tom. You can't seriously think.
Okay, no, they probably won't shoot us down. But they might force the pilot back to a landing at Miami International and take us off the plane there. We're not popular in these parts, Sev.
Not fucking popular anywhere, she muttered.
She caught the translucent gleam of a pea cup at the foot of the bed. She fished it up between two fingers and pressed it up under the weight of her right breast.
All right, Tom, what do you want to do?
Let me talk to Nicholson. He rode out her snort. Sev, he may be an asshole, but he's still responsible for operations. It doesn't look any better for him than for us if we end up slammed in some Miami jail. Sevgi prowled the darkened room looking for the other pea cup.
Nicholson won't get in a fight at the state legislature level, Tom, and you know it. He's too much of a political animal to upset people with that much clout. If Tallahassee gets in line behind this thing, we're going to be left twisting in the wind down here.
Another hesitation. Outside, the sounds of the crowd surged like distant surf. Sevgi found the cup under the bed, dug it out, and fitted it awkwardly, left-handed under her left breast. She sat on the edge of the bed and started seaming her shirt shut again.
Tell me if I'm wrong, Tom.
I think you are wrong, Sev. Nicholson is going to see this as interference with his Colin security authority, and at a minimum it's going to make him look bad. Even if he doesn't take on Tallahassee directly himself, he'll kick it upstairs with an urgent action label attached.
And meanwhile what? We sit tight here?
There are more unpleasant places to be stranded, Sev. He sighed. Look, worst case scenario. You get to spend the day on the beach with your new pal.
My new...
Sevgi took the phone away from her ear and stared at it. The little screen was on innocent, matte grey. Norton hadn't enabled the V-feed.
Fuck you, Tom.
It was a joke, Sev.
Yeah? Well, next time you're down on Fifth Avenue, get yourself a new fucking sense of humor.
She killed the call. From the landward observation tower, it didn't look like much. Several hundred variously dressed men and women milling about in front of the facility gate, while off to the left a suited, white-haired figure declaimed from behind a portable plastic amp box podium. A couple of amateurish, hastily scrawled hollow placards tilted about in the air above the crowd. Teardrops and a few old-style IC vehicles were parked back along the access road, and people leaned against their flanks in ones and twos. Early morning sunlight winked and glinted off glass and alloy surfaces. A couple of helicopters danced in the sky overhead, media platforms by the look of their livery. It didn't look like much, but they were a good 200 meters back from the gate here. The noise was faint and detail hard to see. Sevgi had worked crowd control a few times as a patrol officer, and she'd learned not to make snap judgments about situations involving massed humanity. She knew how quickly it could turn.
"May have the form of a man, but do not be deceived by his form."
The words rinsed up from the podium sound system, still relatively unhysterical. Whoever the preacher was, he was building up slowly.
"Man is made in the image and love of God. This creature was made by arrogant sinners, by shattering the seed God gave us in his wisdom. The Bible tells us—" She tuned it out, squinted up at one of the helicopters as it banked. "No sign of the state police?"
she asked the tower guard. He shook his head. They'll show up if these clowns start charging the gate, not before. And only then, because they know we're authorized to use lethal force if there's a line breach." His face was impassive, but the sour edge in his voice was unmistakable. The name on his chest tag read Kim, but Sevgi knew Korean-American was close enough to Chinese for a common bitterness to find roots. Back before secession, the Jang fever mobs hadn't been all that selective in their lynchings. "I doubt it'll come to that." She faked a breezy confidence. "We'll be out of your hair before lunchtime. They'll all go home after that." "Good to know." She left him staring out across the columned defences at the crowd and made her way back down the caged staircase to the ground. There was an ominous quiet around the facility, in contrast with the noise outside. They'd suspended nano-rack operations while the crisis lasted, and the storage hangars were all closed up. Tracked freight loaders 10 meters broad squatted immobile on the evercrete aprons and access paths like massive scalped tanks, abandoned at the end of some colossal urban conflict. The mortar-board lifting platforms were all empty. At the other end of the complex, the rack thrust up into the cloud cover like a god-size fire escape. It made everything on the ground feel like toys. They'd built Perez early on, back when Mars was still a barely scratched desert, and Bradbury a collection of pressurized fabs. Now it looked used and grim, all mottled greys and blacks and overstated support structure. Compared with the cheery, brightly coloured minimalism at Sagan or Kaku, Perez was a relic. Even for Sevgi, who didn't like the racks, whatever fucking colour they came in, it was a melancholy sight. "Ever been up?" She looked around and saw that Marsalis had gotten within 2 meters of her back without giving himself away. Now he stood watching her with a blank speculation that reminded her of Ethan so much it sent shivers up from the base of her spine. "Not this one, no." She nodded vaguely northward. "They trained me in New York. Kaku rack, mostly. I've been up Sagan and Hawken as well, and what they've built of Levin." "You don't sound over-enthusiastic." "No." It made him smile. "But the money's good, right?" "The money's good," she agreed. He looked away toward the gate. The smile faded out. "Is all that noise out there for me?" "Yes, it is." She felt oddly embarrassed, as if the Republicans on the other side of the wire were acquaintances whose bad behavior she had to cover for. "Blame your old friend Paris. Apparently he took exception to your departure after all. He's fed the whole thing to local media." "Smart of you to bring us here last night, then." She shrugged. "I worked witness protection for a while. You learn never to take anything for granted." "I see." He seemed to consider for a moment. "Are you people going to give me a gun?" "That's not part of the deal. Didn't you read the fine print?" "No." It brought her up short. "You didn't? Ever spent time in a Jesus-land justice facility?" He put on a gentle smile, but his eyes were hard with memory. "It's not the sort of place you quibble over detail if they come to let you out." "Right." She cleared her throat. "Well, the fine print says that you're retained by Colin in an advisory capacity, not for actual enforcement. So, you don't need a gun." "I will if our Jesus-land friends decide to storm the fences." "That's not going to happen here." "Your confidence is inspiring. Can we fly out of here?" "It doesn't look like it. Tom's working the diplomatic angle, but it'll be a while before we know if we can take the risk. In this part of the world, the air nationals tend to shoot first and sift wreckage afterward." "Yeah, I've heard that." He turned away from the powered fences and the gate, looking out across the shimmering surface of the Atlantic. "Speaking of which, any idea why the Sky Cops in the Rim didn't shove a heat seeker up Hawkins' arse when it crossed the line? I hear those boys are pretty jumpy too, and it must have profiled pretty much like a threat." "Local Colin liaison talked him out of it, apparently." "Yeah?" Marsalis raised an eyebrow. "Yes. Relations with the Rim are pretty good these days. It's not like down here. We negotiated a direct AI interface last year, high-level trust protocols, minimal buffering. The Sagan engine mapped the trajectory and shunted it straight to the Rim Air Authority. No blocks, no data checks above basic. It cleared the buffers in a couple of nanoseconds." Sevgi spread her hands. "Everyone's happy." "Especially Merin."
This is the end of the CD. The program continues on the next CD.